Well, the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City opens with everybody serving looks. First Lisa, and then Heather, and then Whitney, and then Bronwyn's dress, and then Bronwyn, Mary and her neck plate, and then the belle of the ball, Angie, who looks incredible. And we also find out that Brittany actually showed up in the same dress. But Angie's the one that got to wear it. And good thing for her because she looked great. Angie looked better than ever. The final snowflake to take the stage was Meredith, and she showed up in a red sparkly number that was kind of understated. Andy opens the show by going around the room and greeting the girls. He congratulates Meredith on her bat mitzvah, Heather on her book. He gives Lisa a little shit about seat 17C and asks Whitney if she's wearing Prism. He welcomes Bronwyn to her first reunion, then gave Mary some props for how much she showed up this season and inquired about Robert Jr. Then it's Angie's turn, and she takes note of the fact that last year she may have been a bench warmer, but now she's first seat. Then Andy jumps right into the juicy parts and starts with Whitney and those Alibaba rumors, which Whitney ended up proving were completely untrue. Then Andy turns to Lisa and says, Lisa, the rumors out there about Whitney white labeling her products was not widely known, so why'd you bring it to camera? Lisa says it was already out there, and Andy called full bullshit on it. Then Meredith joins the conversation and they bring up the blogger again. Then we rolled into all that drama that erupted because Angie said that Lisa lets video games babysit her kids when Heather went and narked what Angie said off to Lisa. Lisa and Angie addressed their beef, and then suddenly Angie's in another beef with Meredith because Meredith says that she prefers Angie as a backup dancer. Angie says, I'm not a backup dancer. I went solo when I was 6 years old. I'm no backup dancer. You can't make this shit up. The rumor about Lisa's G-Wagon getting repossessed comes up, and Angie says, well, I heard it from Bronwyn, and Bronwyn says, well, I heard it from someone else. Then the big issue about the big diamond necklace comes up, and Lisa says, yeah, I know Emma, and she says that you guys didn't buy it. In fact, you didn't buy anything. And then all together, all of the other girls look at Bronwyn and say, listen, if this is true and she shared your personal information with Lisa, I would never do business with her again. And Lisa goes, well, that's what she said, and that's not all she said. And then she takes her phone and she hands it to Andy, who reads the entire text thread and wraps it up with, well, that isn't good. And then Heather says, well, what did it say? And Andy turns to Bronwyn and says, she feels burned by you, Bronwyn. And Bronwyn says, she feels burned by me? And Andy says, yeah. Then the focus officially turns to Bronwyn, her friends, and her fashion. They flash back to all of her juiciest moments, and Bronwyn admits that her and Lisa are on a timeout. She goes on to say that she feels like she spent most of the season chasing Lisa and expecting her to be a better friend than what she really was. Then Lisa says, you know, Bronwyn really is more of like a social friend. Then Lisa says, you know, I think I'm just going to stop recommending friends for this show. And Andy looks confused and said, you've recommended friends for this show? Who? And she goes, oh my God, so many. I mean, the list goes on and on. I think it starts with Heather. And through Heather came Whitney, Angie, Jenny, Angie H, Bronwyn, Angie K. And then Whitney turns to Bronwyn and says, you know, throughout the season, you said over and over again that you felt like you weren't getting any support. But truthfully, I supported you over and over again. And I feel like you're just not willing to claim me publicly as a friend. And Bronwyn goes, I can see that. That is something I can see looking back. I feel like I put Lisa on such a pedestal that I didn't see all the other women that were around me. Then we get into the big confrontation that happened when Heather went over to Bronwyn's house to sing for her supper. And when Andy asked Whitney how she interpreted what happened between the two of them, Whitney said that she could understand both sides. Then Andy reads a comment from a viewer who claimed that Heather's weight loss was the reason that she was edgy this season. She said the weight loss is the reason that Heather has an edge and asked Heather if she can see how it made her a mean girl. Heather's shocked by the question and goes on to say that season 1 Heather was actually way more confident than this Heather. She says that this show strips you of your ego. It strips you of your confidence. Heather says, I actually had a lot more anger and baggage at the beginning. Then Mother Mary pipes up and says, I feel like Heather is different. She likes herself more. She's pouring more love into herself. She says, I feel like when I met Heather 5 years ago, she was very dark. She was not happy. She was trying to recover from everything that she's been through. Then Andy switches gears and he treads lightly into all that dead daddy drama surrounding Bronwyn's daughter, Gwen, which clearly is just such a loaded topic for Bronwyn and has been since the beginning. But apparently on the after show, Lisa mentioned that the dead dad's family was under the impression that Bronwyn had a miscarriage and that there was no baby, which obviously made Bronwyn feel completely betrayed. She feels like Lisa's not just siding with the dead dad's family, but also just engaging in activities that she knew would hurt her and her daughter. Lisa says, Gwen's father has passed away, and she starts crying, and then she goes, I'm in a lose-lose situation here. I'm in a lose-lose. And she goes from crying to sobbing. Lisa says, I should have never talked about him. And then she says to Bronwyn, I wish you would have never brought this to camera. And it is chaos. But then Meredith steps in and tries to be the voice of reason. She turns to Lisa and says, but do you feel badly that Bronwyn and Gwen were hurt by what you said? Because at this point, that's all Bronwyn needs to hear. But Lisa comes back with, I would never want to hurt Bronwyn or Gwen, but I understand the magnitude of what I was asked to do. And it is a very heavy weight. And she's sobbing again and says, for two people who are very good people, who might have a very good future together, I feel like they have two very different experiences, and if they would just talk, they could figure it out. And Bronwyn says, see, she's not remorseful. She keeps defending it. And then Lisa, sobbing again, says, I'm so sorry I fuck up on the daily and it affected you. I'm sorry, okay? And I feel bad for them too, because this is a horrible situation for everyone. And then it's time for lunch. And backstage, all anyone can talk about is how emotional Lisa is today. Meanwhile, over in her room, Lisa is, you guessed it, crying. Over lunch, Whitney says to Angie, listen, Ange, don't you think at some point a rational thinking person would say, since I'm having the same problem repetitiously with all these different people, then maybe it's time for me to just quote Taylor Swift like, I'm the problem, it's me? Meanwhile, over in Heather's room, she's doing an impression of Bronwyn that is hilarious and spot on. Once lunch is over, everyone is back on set, including the husbands. Robert Sr. isn't there, and when Andy asks Mary why, she says he wants no part of this. Then we start with the couples, and there's a montage of Bronwyn and Todd's, shall we say, not so flattering moments. And the rest of the cast reacts very candidly to those moments. Bronwyn says since watching the show back, the two of them have actually had really constructive conversations around the way they talk to each other, and it's actually strengthened their marriage. Andy asked Todd if there was anything off the table when Bronwyn joined the show, and Todd said mainly just her daughter Gwendolyn. He says, I've been with her the majority of her life, and bringing up topics that are sensitive to her is completely unacceptable to me. Almost to the point of being libelous in what was asserted. John Barlow says, who brought it up? And Todd says, your wife. And John says, no, it was Bronwyn that brought it to camera. Andy says, I don't want to relitigate this. Lisa says, Todd, I get where you're coming from. Todd says, let me tell you something. You asserting that Bronwyn had a miscarriage. John says, watch your tone, Todd.